Okay, good morning, everyone. So today I have a lot of free time and I want to discuss The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. It's one of those books that exists in a weird place for me because it's not my favorite book. It's not even in the top 15, but I think it is an extremely misread book. I read it many times since I was 12 years old, and I've read it in high school classes, I've read it in college classes, I've read it on my own. And I honestly do change my opinion about it a lot. And I've seen different ways people will discuss it and teach it, and I have an interpretation that I think I'm going to stick with for a while that is not often represented in high school classes or on Spark Notes, and that is relating to the abuse that runs in the novel and how Holden deals with abuse and how he recognizes abuse that occurs around him. So I want to discuss that, and I want to discuss the term phony, and I want to discuss Holden's little brother and how that affected him. I'm not going to talk about the red hat. I'm not going to talk about the baseball glove. I'm not going to talk about the Ferris wheel or merry-go-round. That you can go online for. I'm just going to, if you're writing an essay on it, now that classes are online, feel free to use some of my ideas. Okay, let's jump in. So, for starters, Holden is neither an enlightened genius, nor is he just this whiny, spoiled brat. He's a kid who is working through trauma. And when you're depressed, it's sometimes something you don't really realize how deeply it manifests with you and how deeply it sticks with you. I don't think Holden really recognizes just how much his brother's death has disturbed him. He does talk about it. It has filtered his language. He no longer says, "I thought it was funny." He says, "It nearly killed me." And then there's one part in the book when he's talking about his sister and his brother and saying, "My sister killed me. She killed everyone. She killed my little brother." I mean, she thought she was funny after he catches himself realizing his brother is dead. His brother died from leukemia. And the night that his brother died, Holden punched out all of the glass windows in his garage. He mutilated his hands in the process, and he had to be hospitalized, and he wasn't even able to go to the funeral. He doesn't really discuss it all that often, and he kind of shrugs it off, and his brother being dead is really a background thing. But it's something that as a reader we should pay careful attention to. In fact, his brother, Ali Nyan, is the death of one of the only people he respects within the novel. The only people that I would argue he has respect for is Ali, his little brother, and Jane, his girlfriend, and Phoebe, his little sister. His relationship with his parents is non-existent. His relationship with his older brother is very strained because he thinks that his brother is a sellout, and he doesn't get along with his peers. He says that, like, his roommate Ackley is gross. He thinks that Stradlater is, Ackley was his friend, sorry. And Stradlater, his roommate, is just this narcissistic monster. There's one part where Stradlater is going on a date with Jane, who Holden has been friends with since childhood but has fallen out of touch with. Holden is very disturbed at the insinuation that Stradlater slept with her. And it reaches the point where Holden tells us he tried to, quote-unquote, sock Stradlater, as in punch him, with all of his might, strictly out of anger. This passage is read, in my experience in classes, as Holden being jealous or wanting to protect Jane's virginity in a gross purity kind of way. But I would argue that this is because Holden believes Stradlater would not, at the very least, pressure a girl to do something she did not want to do with him. Like, right before this encounter ensues, Holden remembers that on a double date with Stradlater, Stradlater kept harassing and manipulating this girl into doing things she didn't want to do. He recalls and I quote, Stradlater would start snowing his date in this very quiet, sincere voice, like as if he wasn't only very handsome, but a nice, sincere guy too. And his date kept saying, no, please, please don't, please. But old Stradlater kept snowing her in this Abraham Lincoln sincere voice, and finally there'd be this terrific silence in the back of the car. Holden doesn't specify what happened, but so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if they had sex with each other or if he was just feeling her up. It's unwanted contact, and for Holden, it's abuse, and it's monstrous. Later on, Holden is bemoaning the fact that he's a virgin, and this is something he goes back and forth on a lot, his virginity. And at this point, he says the problem is, the reason why he's a virgin is because when girls tell him to stop, he will stop, and most guys don't. And he even later in the book, near the end, admits that he was a victim of some sort of sexual abuse in his childhood. When he goes to stay with his teacher, he goes to bed, and when he wakes up, his teacher is touching his face. And Holden panics, jumps up, and rushes out to leave and comes up with an excuse, like, I really gotta go. And he's thinking to himself that this kind of perverty thing has happened to me about 20 times since I was a kid. And this admission is not gendered or queer-coded, even though it is him, a boy, being sexually assaulted in a book in the 50s. It's something that just wants you to call attention to abuse. It's not sexual, it's at its core, it's abuse, and that is what's important. And these two admissions would lead me to believe that Holden doesn't think that sex is healthy and consensual. When he's alone with a prostitute, he gets scared and humiliated, and he tries to see if she just wants to talk to him. And it's really difficult to understand after a while what Holden wants to get out of women. He bemoans the fact that he's a virgin constantly, but then as soon as there is a ready and willing prostitute with him, he's like, oh no, I damaged my clavichord. When he idolizes Jean, he thinks she is amazing and wonderful, and he misses her, and he loved the way she put the kings at the back of the board. And Sally is an interesting girl. He asks her out on a date, and he constantly goes back and forth between being annoyed with her, because she's ditzy, and then being like, oh, she's so cute though, and really getting into the date. And ultimately that was really just a way for him to pass the day. He seems to only want a sense of companionship out of people. And I think that's why he has such a close relationship with Phoebe, his little sister. Because he doesn't want to do anything. He wants to feel like he is seen and have someone to talk to. And going back a little bit to the violence, he's insanely troubled by violent events that he has witnessed, yet he only will mention them in really brief snippets. I can't snap, sorry. So there's James Castle, and James Castle is a subject that I get really fixated on because I hated how my high school teacher and some people in Goodread and not going to call out someone who I think might see this. I get annoyed at how certain people read it because it's often presented, even on Spark Notes, that James Castle killed himself, that James Castle jumped out the window and killed himself, and Holden was in the next dorm over. And that is what happened, but that's leaving out so much context for what happened. Because Holden recalls that James had been pushed into jumping to escape a group of bullies that were torturing him. They were doing things that were so violent that Holden refused to describe it. Holden said it was too repulsive to describe, so James jumped out the window, and there was old James Castle lying right on the stone steps with his teeth and blood all over the place. And all the guys that were in the room with him were expelled. They didn't even go to jail. So this is what we know. This group of boys came into James Castle's room, locked the door, and started doing something too repulsive to describe. And to escape them, he jumped out the window. So When I read that and saw it was too repulsive to describe, I kind of took that to mean it was something sexual in nature. I'm thinking 13 Reasons Why, Season 2. Lovely mop scene. Didn't traumatize me at all. I should not be laughing in this scene. And the point of this all is that James was encountering tremendous violence, and to escape it, he had to commit another violent act, which is to jump out the window. This is always presented as a suicide, and it wasn't. There's nothing to say that he would have done it if they weren't in the room with him. It was strictly to escape. It gives you this idea he was pushed into doing it. Not physically, but forces pressured him. He felt it was it's the equivalent to me of someone jumping out of the Twin Towers when it was coming down instead of staying in the burning building. It's, yeah, you chose to end it, but you chose to escape something that you thought was worse. And this is Holden's classmate. Holden lent him a sweater that he had on when he was dead, and Holden heard him jump out the window. And as he's thinking this, he's sitting in Central Park, and then he's suddenly thinking about how badly he wants to jump out a window, and how he would kill himself if only his mother wouldn't have, if only it wasn't going to make his mother have to deal with the deaths of 2 of her children. And that's like the only time Holden ever offered you any thought towards his parents. He says right at the start, his parents would hate it if he was talking about them, so he's not going to. Which really gives you this impression that Holden is very isolated. And to go back to the title of this lovely book, The Catcher in the Rye. Pretty sure I'll beat over the head with why it is called this, because in the middle of the book, he has a long digression about it. He's sitting with his little sister Phoebe, and when she asks him, what do you want to do with his life, he says, I keep picturing all these little kids playing some game in this big field of rye and all, thousands of little kids, and nobody's around. Nobody big, I mean, except me. And I'm standing there on the edge of some crazy cliff. What I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start going over the cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't look where they're going, I have to come right out from somewhere and catch them. That's all I do all day long. I'd be the catcher in the rye. I know it's strange, but it's the only thing I want to do. I know it's crazy. So, to recap, he wants to protect the innocent. And yes, I think it would be creepy, or at the very least a little weird, if you were talking to some 15-year-old and you asked him, what do you want to do with your life? And he goes, man, I just want to stand in a field and catch children before they jump off a cliff. I'd be a little weirded out by that, but let's take him seriously. He's a dumb kid, we're going to take him seriously. What he's saying is he wants to protect you. He wants to step in and stop anything bad from happening to you. They're playing innocent. These children are playing. They're innocent. They're happy. And before anything could affect that, before they can die of leukemia or be killed or jump off a building, what have you, he just wants to be able to step in and stop them. Earlier in the book, he's remembering a day when he was playing with Jane. They're playing chess. They're playing checkers, sorry. And, her stepfather came in the room. And he came in, he walked out, and this made Jane start crying. And it doesn't go into why she was crying. You can kind of get the impression she doesn't like him. You can get the impression she's scared of him, her stepfather. But Holden doesn't ask her what's wrong. Instead, he moves so he's kind of sitting on her lap, and he starts kissing her cheeks and her forehead and her nose and everything except for her mouth. So, putting aside that sounds like the worst kiss ever. You're just sobbing and this boy is just on your lap kissing your face. It really is a very innocent way of trying to comfort someone. It reminds me of a parent, sorry, it's my cat, a parent crying and a little kid trying to do what they can. It's this vain, fruitless effort, but you're trying to bring some sense of comfort. And we've talked about this in one of my college classes about the significance of him sitting on her lap and whether that might be gendered or queer coded. My takeaway is that it wasn't either. It was just that he wants to live in this genderless utopia with that's very childlike and innocent. When I say genderless, I don't mean like the way we think of it now. I mean, I guess like how childhood is in a way genderless. It's, it's it's just boys and girls playing together and playing and hopefully not falling off of a cliff. So Holden has this futile desire in him to stop reality, stop abuse, stop death from corrupting the innocent. And honestly, I think that is heartbreaking and sweet because Holden has dealt with so much trauma in his life. He's seen his little brother die. He saw his classmate die. He was abused as a child by his own admission. He witnessed other girls getting abused. It's like the world wants to stop him from being good in a way by everything that's thrown at his path. And I'm not going to say he's a hero. I don't think I'd want to hang out with him, but I'd say he means well. I don't think he's a whiny, spoiled brat. I think he's incredibly privileged. I think he is definitely whiny, but he's depressed, and he is watching a lot of bullshit happening. Like, his brother just died, and he couldn't go to the funeral because he punched a window in anger. And he doesn't offer you much else on how he felt. He doesn't tell you what it was like when his brother was dying. He doesn't tell you what it was like in the long term after. He just tells you right away. He punched a bunch of windows and he claims he doesn't even know why he did it. Which I think that's because he's embarrassed that he hurt himself and he's upset he couldn't go to the funeral, and it was an outburst. When it comes to the term phony, I have a lot of feelings about this. I'm going to try to make it very concise because I feel like this video is running on a little. Holden calls everyone a phony. That's like the first thing that people will remind you about Catcher in the Rye. I myself considered making the first line of this video, "Hi, you phonies," but I decided against it because I felt like I wouldn't be able to take myself seriously. When Holden says phony, he uses it a lot. He calls everyone a phony. No matter who it is. And then he himself acts a bit fake. He acts a bit, sorry, it's my cat. He acts a bit phony. He'll say one thing that's not true. He tells the woman on the train, his classmate's mother, that he has a brain tumor. He'll put on a fake voice when he's in the cabs. So I don't think being a phony is his way of saying, like, you act fake, because he acts fake too. I think it's him trying to articulate why he is so upset with everything, and because he doesn't know. Because he mentions constantly these things that have happened. He mentions his brother dying. He mentions punching the windows. He mentions James Cass's death. He mentions seeing Jane burst into tears over her stepfather. And he never reconciles what all of these things mean with each other. He never gets into some introspection about it. I think this kid could benefit from a good therapist. I was telling my professor at college that I think him saying phony is him not able to recognize why he mistrusts the world so much. And that's just the closest thing he can come up with. I think he mistrusts the world because he's seen so much abuse happen. He has seen his brother die, and he knows that that's not fair. He has seen James Castle die, and he knows it's not fair that the kids who were torturing him in his room didn't even go to jail. So his way of saying you're all a bunch of phonies. Everyone's a phony. This man's a phony. She has a phony way of talking. It's because he's disgusted at the world. And some of it is just teen angst, and some of it is, I think, justified. I cannot say that I wouldn't be super upset if my little sibling died and died this slow, painful death, and my parents just immediately sent me away to school and didn't help me deal with it. So I think I'm going to wrap up around here because I don't want to, belabor this point. But I guess my biggest takeaway from The Catcher in the Rye is Holden is a bit dumb at times, and he is frustratingly indecisive. And it's difficult to understand what he's trying to get, what his long-term goal is, what he doesn't really have a long-term goal, I should say. And I understand feeling frustrated when you have to deal with him as a narrator. But Holden isn't a bad kid. He's depressed, and he is traumatized in a lot of ways. And like I said, he really needs the therapist. I hope that wherever he is, whether he is in a tuberculosis ward, which frankly I don't really believe because he only gave us one line about that, or if he is, and I don't see the journaling progress, like something that you would do there, or he's in a psych hospital. I think he really needs help. And like I said, I think his heart is in the right place. I think he really does want to do good. And I feel for this kid. He's annoying, but I feel for him. Okay, so anyway, I hope that helped you with your essays, or your assignments, or whatever you have, or if you just enjoyed listening to me talk forever about this book. I hope that's not Corona. I'm probably going to make this into a series where I just pick different books that I have read and offer you guys some study guides for it, or some study questions for it. So until the next time I do that, all right, enjoy your quarantine. Right, bye.